Welcome to this webinar on the white paper about Erasmus Without Paper that we have released 1 month ago. My name is Joachim Wissling. I am part of the EUF team, and I think, yes, we can probably get started so that we can stick to the schedule that we have planned for today. Please note that we are recording for this session as well, so that we can share the content of this webinar with the participants who couldn't join us today. We're going to have about 45 minutes of conversation, and then we will use the 50 minutes remaining for questions and answers that you might have, or comments that you might have on the white paper, so that we can also have a conversation. So with regards to the white paper we have released 1 month ago, we have received lots of feedback, and actually rather positive feedback from the community on its content, even also suggestions on things that we could add to the white paper, or we could take into consideration for the future. And as I said, today we are having a conversation with the main contributors to this white paper. Before we get started with this conversation, I just wanted to highlight a bit the process which has led up to the making of this white paper, which I think has started in 2023 and is based on the membership of the EUF, of the universities, which are all, of course, involved in the general digital transformation process, but also the universities which have very specific competence and inside knowledge on how Erasmus Without Paper works, and what is already there and what ought to happen in the future. We have used the EUF network as sort of a pulse-taking exercise to also get the input from members in this regard, but also Erasmus Without Paper, EWP, community meetups that were organized throughout 2023 in different countries, where we also took sort of informal feedback from the higher education community on where things are heading and should be heading. I think most famously, I should also single out the Student Mobility Summit, which was hosted by the University of Barcelona by the end of January 2024, this year. And we received lots of feedbacks also from the participants at that conference, with, I think, great enthusiasm for the future with regards to Erasmus Without Paper and the new use cases we should consider there. So all in all, in a nutshell, I would say we have about 500 higher education institutions who have directly or indirectly contributed in the conversations and the dialogue that has led up to this white paper. And with that, I'll start passing the word also to the contributors who are here with me today. We have João, he's also part of the EUF team. He's our executive manager. We have Valère, he is co-father of Erasmus Without Paper. You never really know how to portray to describe you, Valère, but thanks very much for joining us today here as well. And we have Taiga, who is very much involved in the current proceedings of Erasmus Without Paper. So my first question to get this conversation started to you, what did you find the most striking when working towards the creation of this white paper? Who wants to start? Taiga, you want to take the floor first?
Yeah, I will start. And I think for me, maybe the biggest topic was the interinstitutional agreements. And yeah, like to respond to the question on like what is maybe the striking and also kind of the interesting and very, very important part when working on it was really to try to devise a proposal on how exactly we can come and, well, basically go from the interinstitutional agreement processes now, which we know are very inefficient, to having a process that is rather lean and easy to maintain. And I think that IIAs have been a very big topic for, I mean, all of the higher education institutions, but for all the wrong reasons. And it is also something that is important to recognize, that there is a big potential to go from this process being a headache to it actually taking a fraction of the time that it consumes now. And for us here, the starting point was actually the EWP assessment report in 2023. So this is an annual report that we are working on to basically map the status quo of the network and to understand what exactly would be the issues that the universities would be facing, be technical or otherwise. And what we mapped in this 2023 report was basically to see how interinstitutional agreement processes actually had never been properly adapted to the digital age. And when we are thinking about this process, I mean, like really, like the way how it comes into being, those agreements and like how they are finalized, I mean, it's really that they have rather been digitized than not digitalized. And so this was basically the first key consideration. And when we were further analyzing it and trying to make sense of it, what we were looking at was rather the agreements that would be still renewed, not the new ones that would be established, because also, let's face it, when it comes to this program, the interinstitutional agreements were already put forward and actually set up, be it in digital form or rather in the paper form. That's of course a different question, but they're already out there. So, so this is basically was another aspect to keep in mind. And our proposal is basically having and building on the logic of the learning agreements. So something that we know that works very well and actually moves away from the master logic, if that expression means something to you. And it basically just tries to give justice to all the work that institutions have already invested in creating the interinstitutional agreements. And basically because in the end, like what those agreements are about, it's really these cooperation conditions that are at the core and is really the beating heart of those agreements. And in the next program period, the proposal that we are putting forward is basically taking this data and working on a way how those agreements could be easily extended. And what we are also suggesting there is how it could be organized. I mean, determining, for example, the renewal window. And it outlines also more practical steps that, again, like it could be a longer discussion. But all in all, this is, in my opinion, a very realistic and also ambitious proposal, because in the end, we also highlighted that like it's clear that some agreements have also been in the meantime digitized in a paper, well, not digitized, have been renewed in a paper form. But even so, there would be records, there would be internal records in university systems. So this part, those agreements could actually be then imported and still could follow the logic that is being outlined, and they could still follow the same pattern. So, I mean, in general, it's very clear that interinstitutional agreements are needed in the digital form because they are then the base for the nominations and the learning agreements. But it's also clear that it has been a very bumpy road for the institutions. And yes, this proposal is trying to assure that the work that has been done is not done in vain, but quite the opposite. It's covering, I mean, also actually already the next program period. So, I mean, the work that has been done is already building and is the core for ensuring that the next program, this exercise would be actually very swift and very easy. So yeah, I would say this would be my highlight.
Thanks a lot, Taiga. So that is indeed a very, very important point. And I think it was also one of the points that was highlighted in the white paper with regards to moving away from PDF templates and really going into a more data-driven world and sort of changing the logic which is underpinning this process. Vale, how did that look like for you?
Well, to me, the working on this paper was a very good reminder of what we started out from. And I fully remember the slogan from the beginning where we said it should be done by universities and for universities. It was not always easy to make this happen, but the white paper is based on a lot on consultation of many institutions. And we've always tried to make this happen to make sure that the users themselves are fully taken into account whenever new things were organized. This has resulted in a governance structure which, in a way, is an umbrella for lots of different stakeholders. We talk about the business owners, which is basically the IROs, and there are the user groups, which are now being used a lot by a lot of people on Slack. There's the providers have their own board. There's the digital officers at the national agencies. And of course, we also have other university forums and the student organizations. And it's always been very, very important for us to make this happen. Anyway, this is a reflection of what is happening in Europe as well, the point of view of the citizens, the users, make it as practical as possible. before I started on EWP, I dabbled a little bit in computers as well. And I always said to people, whatever you want to do, it is the users that come first and not the algorithm, not the computer program itself, which when I was doing these things was something of a heresy to many computer specialists anyway. But okay, that's the main thing for me was by universities for universities. And we've seen this reflected in this white paper.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. I mean, the governance structure that you're describing seems rather complex, and this it could be considered as being something that slows us down. So this direct democracy, as you're describing it here in the context of Erasmus with our paper, is not so easy to be implemented. What do you think about that?
Well, it's not always easy to implement, and we have lots of very heated debates sometimes, especially among providers, about how things should progress. But on the other hand, it makes us keep our feet on the ground, as it were, and especially, for example, in conferences and so on, we see a lot of people coming to us saying, well, what about this, what about that, and so on. I used to be the coordinator of, for example, the Great Conversion Project, Erasmus, and it saddens me to see that it's still not fully included in EWP, even though this is something that is very much on the mind of many people. And dare I say, there is another dark horse somewhere, the beneficiary module. We've tried in the very beginning and from the very beginning to make this included in EWP, but for various reasons, technical, internal, political, and whatever, it hasn't happened yet. But it would make life so much more simple for many people. And we should listen to such ideas, and we should try and make this happen. And that to me, that is crucial.
Thanks a lot, Valère, for this. Jean?
Thanks, Joachim. And good afternoon, everyone. My voice is not great today. I hope that this is going to work. Well, Daiga and Valère covered very serious points and very important points. So let me take your question and try a slightly different direction, because you asked what was interesting. To be honest, I think there are also things that was fun to work with. And personally speaking, for me, one of the most fun things was the efficiency gains analysis. This might sound weird as far as having fun goes, but let me explain a little bit. I think part of the reason why this was interesting for me, maybe also for you and for the colleagues, was because we had already done some work in this field circa 2016 with the OLA and, you know, some breakthrough, groundbreaking measurements at the time. And we always had it in the back of our mind that this is important to quantify, to try to measure, also to assess how far we are in terms of reaching the goals that we want to achieve. But the truth is that we've been really quite busy to be able to sink our teeth in this for until now, until the white paper. So the colleagues that will have read the paper will see that we actually drew inspiration by an article that was published by colleagues from 4 universities on this topic. They did their own analysis with a methodology that is distinct from what we had used in the past. And we cited, of course, in the white paper. And so this was a good kick to go back at it. And this is because digitalization is not an end in itself. We're not trying to advance EWP because we like computers or something like that. The purpose obviously is to serve one or several concrete goals, improving quality, being able to send more students, etc., etc. Now, I should also say that doing this kind of analysis at European level with such an heterogeneous array of higher education institutions, practices, requirements, this is really difficult. We are very mindful of the limitations of the data that we worked with. We've tried to actually be fairly conservative with the numbers that we've put out. But I think even so, this is, to my knowledge, at least the most comprehensive analysis that has been published to date on this topic. And what I hope is that this will be useful for universities that need to plan and are discussing and considering about their own digital transition, because it should hopefully allow them to quantify a little bit and to have this rationale of why to do so. We know that digital transition takes a lot of patience and sometimes a lot of investment as well to get going. So getting through that curve as quickly as possible, it is important. Now, of all the efficiency analysis that we've done, there is one category that for me personally was perhaps surprising to work with, at least a little bit, because we also looked at processes that excuse me, that can be automated, or if done right, we could have efficiency gains of 100%. And this is particularly the case for things like the fact sheets, the certificates of arrival, the certificates of departure, and the issuing, the exchange of transfer of records. So we're looking into the future. We're not talking about necessarily things that colleagues can start using today. And what was interesting for me is that, I mean, for example, certificates of arrival. It's not a big deal. No, it's not top of our list. It's not nearly as important as an IA or as a learning agreement. But when we look at the numbers, this is not peanuts. When we put together all of the effort that goes into all of these processes, and for me, it was also interesting to talk with colleagues and learn from them that, for example, in quite a few universities, there's no time to update the fact sheet data. It just sits somewhere on the drive. It's not it's not ideal in order to, with regards to putting the valuable information at notably the fingertips of the students. So when we take all of these small bits together, this does add up to a very significant effort. And I think it offers us kind of a line of sight about if there are processes that cannot disappear. Open parentheses, we've discussed and proposed in the past to move grants to a unit cost basis, which would do away with the need for the certificates of arrival and departure, but that's not the reality for the majority of institutions. So if we can't make them go away, maybe sometime in the near future, we can remove them from the day-to-day work of the IROs. So all in all, I think looking at his numbers also reminded me a little bit, like Valer was saying, that reminded him of some of the work done in the past, of what we're talking about in terms of potential to achieve really a change of paradigm. A bit of work, admittedly, but at least knowing what we're working towards, reminding ourselves of that, I thought that was one of the fun parts in terms of the work that led to the white paper.
Thanks a lot, João. Yeah, indeed. I mean, the 4 chapters in the white paper and 1 chapter has been dedicated to the efficiency gains. This was indeed a priority to look at when we receive suggestions on how they could or potentially translate into saving working time for the international regulation officers involved in these processes. Thanks a lot for saying that out. Yes, please,
it's so we usually talk about saving time. That's kind of an obvious goal in terms of the organization of work, because I don't think there are many universities out there that have an abundance of staff working at IRO. I mean, we're all short for time, overworked, etc., etc. So obviously that, but there are different ways to look at this as well. I mean, we can look at it as time saved that can be invested in something else, improve the overall quality and impact of work. We can also look at it from a very bureaucratic viewpoint and understand what are we talking about in terms of administrative costs that maybe don't need to be there forever. And I usually talk about something which sounds a bit populist and probably is, which is, hey, this is money that we probably could use to pay more student grants or higher student grants. This is true of everything. And of course, it's not that simple, but it's to say that it's also about optimizing a program, which is very large at European level, 30 billion euros or so. Even if we look just at the higher education sector, this could be really significant. Sorry, Joachim, back to you.
Thanks, João. And that brings me actually to the next point of this conversation, which is asking our contributors here, white paper, what they would have liked to be actually did not in the white paper. Who wants to start?
I can actually build on what João finished up on, because I think for me, like the key first point that comes to my mind is really the students, because I mean, yeah, more focus on improvements for the student experience, because at the moment, and I think like now in the also last couple of months and in almost years, the focus really has been rather on the work with the institutions, with the IROs. And I think it's also clear why, because of course, yeah, if we're trying to try to make sure that interinstitutional agreements work. I mean, like that's something where the student is not directly involved. But then again, I mean, like, what is it all about at the end of the day? I mean, it's the student's experience, and it's also to make sure that more learners can participate in Erasmus and they can have a better mobility experience that is just more enriching, smoother, and so yeah, it's the core of why we're doing it in the first place. And I think that when we're also remembering the core values of the EWP and what Lair was highlighting from universities to universities, I mean, it has always been having this user-centered form and mindset, and also students have been at the table of the discussions. So it's a bit pity to see that when we're looking, for example, at the European Student Card Initiative, in for example, last 2 years, there haven't been as many novelties or as many student-facing new things that we could talk about. And it's indeed, I think, something where it would be important to redirect, and where, we would be regaining spotlight, because it's not just also, of course, like improving the student experience, but also allowing them to co-shape it and them getting more active in it. Because I think when we're, for example, looking at the processes like learning agreements, I mean, when they are being digitalized, there are also new doors opening for them. And aspect as automatic recognition. Now it has, for example, been added to the learning agreement template. And the moment when learning agreements are in digital form, I mean, there's just such a critical piece of data that we can make sense on the recognition practices that could be very, very interesting for students and student representatives. And of course, also there's so many ideas on helpful services for students. And so how to make sure that they are accessible to them, and how to make sure that they're really helpful for them. So to a certain extent, we tried to tackle this in the chapter that was focusing on European Student Card solutions. But I think more could be said, and I would really hope that indeed in the next steps we would have more space to look through the students' eyes and work together with them, and they are more active in co-creating this ecosystem together. And indeed, there's more focus on added benefits and tangible benefits for them.
Thanks a lot, Daiga, for that. The student experience has been a bit left past our backs in a way for the past few years, but also because of what you were saying, we have to build the baseline of the infrastructure going. So that's actually very interesting. Maybe it's also the point of moving past digital, really going into digital transformation and using the potential of changing the way things work to actually have a real impact on the student experience. Thanks for that.
And
Shall we move
to
to
add,
yes?
what also in line with what Lair was saying, I mean, the governance and their involvement and really working together with them.
A segue for Valère, please.
Yes, well, there are many things that, of course, could be improved in EWP. One of the things that I'm still missing, even though we had talked about it from the very, very, very beginning, is how to include course data, course catalogs, unifying them, making sure that every student can actually select courses whenever they provide this. And of course, this is important not only for the learning agreements, but also for recognition, and obviously also for grade conversion. So it is something that has been worked on in various side projects, as it were, and it has been on our mind very much, but it's something that perhaps we should concentrate on more, because it would be a huge benefit to everyone involved. And as Daiga was saying, it would actually help the students themselves a lot, because let's face it, sometimes working out what courses they're going to follow and so on at the moment is not an easy thing to do. We've made great progress in this respect, but it's not included in EWP yet, even though there are proposals for APIs and everything already. So this is something which is important, not only for the institutions and the students as such, but also for the alliances for whom this is a very important aspect that needs to be worked on even more.
Thanks a lot, Valère. Indeed, access to information about courses, course data is more and more considered as being one of the bottlenecks to be addressed. Also for the alliance, I remember one workshop that we had at the Student Mobility Summit in Barcelona on digitalization beyond the current scope of Erasmus Without Paper, and this was one of the main points that came up during the workshop. So thanks for bringing that up here as well. Back to usual.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the University Student Forum, and I like that both Tag and Valer talked about things that maybe are not happening as much as we would like them to, that build a bridge to the question of improving the student experience by and large, or even the quality of the program as such. And we also had a panel with student representatives in Barcelona during the Student Mobility Summit. And I feel like staying in this area of things that we didn't got to include in this white paper, there are two things that were obviously on the table, and I think everyone is familiar with it. Accommodation is a huge challenge increasingly. This is actually one of the areas where there have been novelties added, in this case, to the Erasmus app. So small but important steps to try to to tackle this challenge. But there are many things that would have to happen downstream. And here I'm reminded of work that was done in some of the projects that we've been involved about, for example, making it possible sometime in the near future, hopefully, that a student could, for example, have the dorm contract signed before the departure, just peace of mind. This quickly goes into questions of qualified signatures and very technical jargon that I guess I'm not supposed to venture into, but it's an important use case. And there is a second one, which is also, I think, very relevant to the student experience, and that student reps, I think, rightly emphasize, which is we still have far too many students that get their grants too late. And this is something that we should be able to do better. And we know that in some countries there has been significant progress to make sure that this happens less and less. But ultimately, it's a question of inclusion. If we want a program to cater to an entire student population, we cannot assume that they would have the luxury of going abroad, having all of the upfront expenses, only then getting the grant. So I think I'm not saying anything revolutionary, and I say there's probably work to be done to interlink more steps like signing the mobility agreement and to link that to the payment. This is, to be very clear as well and transparent, as a colleagues, this is not on the radar of EWP as such, but there are colleagues working on this. There are projects investigating this. So it goes back to the ethos of by universities and for universities. So I think there might already be, if not definitive solutions, things that can be leveraged to address these issues in the future.
Thank you, João, for this as well. It's true that grant payments and the signature of grant agreements or also housing agreements is an issue that would tremendously also improve, again, the student experience that Daigo was mentioning at the beginning. So thanks for going in that direction and looking a bit beyond what we have in this white paper. Moving back to the white paper, one last question that I have for you, well, actually second last question. Are there new concepts in the white paper that you would want to highlight for the audience here today? So things that we have introduced here and that might not be, well, let's say general knowledge for our colleagues in attendance here today. Taiga?
Yes, the concept that I would highlight, but I think actually it's starting to gain traction, and it's something that is more often being used and discussed. And actually, I think it's a really, really good thing that it's the case. It's the vendor lock-in and the data portability. Maybe it's well, somehow two sides of the same coin, because indeed, like I think when we are thinking of the EWP and looking past since the inception of it, like 10 years ago, we had around 5-6 providers, and now we have above 20. So on paper, when we are kind of looking at this growth, what it means is that there are more providers, there's more diversity, and the university should be receiving better services. But this is true if it's really a healthy marketplace that allows institutions to also vote with their feet. And if their needs are not met and their needs are changing, maybe, I don't know, there's a merger or there's any other situation, and they simply need something else, that they can easily do so. They can easily move to another place and take their data with them and not not have massive resources needed to invest in this. And this is really then the situation where this concept becomes just so important. And for us, also internally with the UF, we do have more data on the range of experiences that actually institutions are having with diverse providers. And some are very happy, and there are some that are very unhappy. And so this is really when it's so vital to problematize these concepts and actually to work towards it, that institutions can have more agency to really then have a situation established for managing the mobilities and actually managing their students' data in the best possible way. And so what we are suggesting is to basically to establish and also enforce the data portability framework. What we already have the moment when we actually have the EWP and the data standards for different processes. I mean, there is base understanding, okay, what kind of data do we need to exchange? But what is required on top of it is also a framework for how the import and export is being managed. And this is really a critical also step to recognize that the both are needed. It's not just the import of data and acquisition of new clients, but it's also export. So that it's really a two-way street. And for the institutions, there is complete flexibility and in being able to choose the best and the most suitable solution for their needs. And so yeah, I mean, the base work for this has already been there. It's also important to recognize that since the inception actually of the EWP, this notion and the importance of it has been recognized. I mean, when any of the new parties are joining the EWP network, they're actually signing the memorandum of understanding that includes data portability concept as something that they would also undersign to. And it's really the practical steps and enforcement of this that is really necessary as the next important tasks to do. Discussions are on the way already with the providers, and we do hope that in the next 2-3 years, we would really have this well-functioning system where data import and exports, it's really lived and enforced this way that institutions are able to move more freely. And I mean, this is also something to highlight that like the key premise also in this in the set of values that EWB has is to making sure that institutions are having a voice and they're having a strong voice. And I think that further work on data portability and yes, against the vendor lock-in is therefore a very important one.
Thanks a lot, Taika. It's true that Erasmus with our paper and by extension the European Student Card Initiative, it has created a market opportunity by existing and new providers. And what we can see is that their responsibilities are increasing there. But of course, we also need to make sure that the service is living up to expectations. And data portability is a guarantee for quality of service. And I think this is a key concern that we ought to continue voice in the near future. Turning to Valère, what would be your point that you would single out?
Adding basically to what Taika is saying in terms of data portability, as we all know, EWP is a decentralized digital infrastructure that we control as a network, but we do not control or we have no say over what is happening in the tools themselves, whether they are homemade, as it were, based in institutions or commercial. And for this, we've always thought that it would be very important to have conformance testing, making sure that everyone adheres to the rules that we've set, and that in a way that would also help, of course, the data portability, because as everyone is doing the same things in the same way, it should be much easier. And that is sometimes a problem, because of course some of the solutions that we all agree to after many discussions are not always ideal for some software, or they are better, easier implemented in other software and things like that. So if we had automatic conformance testing, whereby people could test all the time, is this now in agreement? How do we solve it? What can we do? That would be a huge beneficial thing. has been happening, but of course, unfortunately, for example, when we've seen happening in the new version of the institutional agreements API. Otherwise, what we are doing is just spending a lot of effort testing each one individually all of the time. This is very time consuming. It is not easy, and it doesn't help to bring about a consensus of what is really needed. And I think that is a strict thing. In order to have very good action plans that developers can actually adhere to, we do actually need this conformance testing, and I think it is highlighted in the white paper as well.
Yes, indeed. That has been one of the points highlighted in the white paper, and it's true that conformance testing would allow us probably to also anticipate bugs and errors before the systems enter into production. And as you were saying, Valère, we're in a distributed system, so there are many different systems that are connected to Erasmus without paper, and we don't know how they interact with each other if we don't do proper testing before we introduce them into the production environment. Yes. So I think it's actually a very, very important point, and I personally do hope that we will be able to get there sometime soon. Thanks, Valère. Moving to João.
Just
yes, Tiger, you had that. Yeah, please.
To further emphasize on the importance of the conformance testing, because I mean, of course, like the moment when you move from the development to production, that's the time when and I mean, yeah, the focus on the testing is put, but it's just so important to actually have that check all the time, because let's face it, the systems are having continuous updates because of, I don't know, necessity to comply with the security requirements, whatever, like any new tweaks just are maybe just in the user interface, just to further improve some small unrelated things, but it still happens that the tests would be required to be redone because it somehow influences other aspects of the ecosystem. And therefore, given that like everything is continuously being further developed and further improved, I mean, having an automated tool would allow for making sure that any kind of small things would be caught on the fly, because really like the resources that would be required for then all the time manual testing with actual technical teams, I mean, this is really yeah incomparable, and therefore why we're trying to outline in the white paper why there's so many reasons why the conformance testing just makes sense.
Thanks, Tiger. And it would also decrease the frustration of the users afterwards of the system, most probably, I assume so. João.
Okay, this is interesting because I'm not going to talk about conformance testing, even though I'm a big fan of the topic. But I will talk about something that I think it's connected to it, and that it must be very popular with the colleagues in attendance today, which is deadlines. Buckle up, because the white paper covers a lot of ground. It's not just technical bits and bobs, it's also policy and regulatory issues. Now, why is this a new concept? Is because we've obviously went from, the pendulum has swung from very strict deadlines set in 2019 to their removal in 2022. And we have a chapter in the white paper, which I think is called Smart Regulation. And this is the entry point into that conversation. So we can start this conversation with a very easy thought experiment. What can we do as a community when almost all of the universities have went digital with their processes, but we have a group of, I don't know, 15% that remain still in the transition phase. This might seem like, it's only a few, who cares? But it's still important because one single university is connected to often hundreds of partners. So one single university can fragment the processes of all of their partners if they have to be dealing with things via WP and via email and via fax and pigeons. I don't know, hopefully not pigeons, animal rights and all. So it has, in a network like this, small disturbance can obviously generate important inefficiencies. So what we're trying to reflect upon, and it's not an easy discussion, obviously, is that probably it's also not good enough to say that, hey, you do what you need to do, and it's not fair to the colleagues that are impacted on the other side of this decision-making process. And so the paper does bring back the concept of deadlines, but it tries to do so in a different way than we had them in the past. And it basically outlines a couple of steps that, for which deadlines, I know the term is not popular, but bear with me. I'm surprised that not everybody has left the webinar yet. But so a couple of steps that after which deadlines might be the logical conclusion. Step number one is directly connected with the discussion that you're having about conformance testing. It was already the case in the original roadmap in 2019 that there was an asterisk saying the deadlines apply if the technical solutions are fit for purpose. And the reason why the colleagues rightly highlighted the importance of stepping up is because 2 years ago, there was nothing. And a lot has happened, but we can do better. And so if we have this awareness, there's also responsibility to act on it. So this happened even before users see things as such. A second step, in our opinion, is the question of support, because we know how difficult it was in 2021, 2022. Many colleagues trying to meet deadlines, but not having, we had a tiny help desk at the time, which was project funded. I think it was 7,000 tickets that we got, and we had a 80% full-time colleague working on it. So obviously this cannot work. We've learned from that. That has been rectified. We have much more capacity there now. So this is not saying that we're doing something wrong or not sufficient. It's saying that it's an essential element of this puzzle. So be able to support all of the community to make a smooth digital transition. And the third aspect is we're now on a paradigm of organic uptake. And that would be a discussion in and out of itself. I think it's something that personally I'm not used to yet. So long working towards targets and deadlines, I'm still wrapping my mind around what it means to take full advantage of saying we do this at a pace that is reasonable, that kind of averages out what the entire community can and is ready to do. But presumably, and I think we already see some signs of this in things like learning agreements, there comes a time where you get to that kind of 80% usage level, and then Pareto law kicks in. So if all of the conditions that I've been talking about have been validated by the community itself, and I'm looking this up in what Valer was talking about, the importance of a sound governance system where the stakeholders, all of the stakeholders are involved. So if the stakeholders feel that, all of the steps have been successfully accomplished, there might be a need for finding this Goldilocks compromise between our deadlines and no deadlines at all. So it's a conversation that I don't think it's urgent. It's a conversation for the future. How do we organize ourselves as a community to try to make this work? It's a topic that we all have painful memories about, but I think we can also learn from that experience and try to improve a little bit the way things work and still find enough common ground so that we are not stepping in each other's toes and causing collateral damage because of the way the transition is organized.
Thanks a lot, João. I think that point is a very interesting one because when we discuss it with the higher education institutions themselves, they say, well, I'm ready to go ahead with the digitalization process in Erasmus with our paper, but I also need to know that my partners are doing the same thing because otherwise I'm doing this thing just on my own and then all my efforts will be void or partially void, right? So that discussion needs to happen for sure at some point of how we're going to get there. Yes.
We always say it takes two to tango, but in this case, it might take 400, 500, 1,000 to work in concert, which is, it's not an easy thing. I don't think we should beat ourselves up because we haven't perfectly nailed it yet. But that's why it's a useful conversation for us to have to one another. And indeed, I think that there are many colleagues that feel this needs to work for everybody, really.
All right, thanks. So we are 45 minutes into the webinar, and I have one last question. I'll ask you to answer to that one in 30 seconds, 1 minute, each of you. If you have one wish for the future, what is it? And after that, we're going to take the questions and comments from the colleagues here with us today. So who wants to start here?
I can start again. For me, the wish would be that we can really see and live this full power of digitalization and that universities can have their efficiency gains and all the things that will come as a result of this. And I think that the process that illustrates the power of this, maybe the best, is actually nominations. And I think, I mean, here we don't have a template. We have rather the full beauty of diversity of Europe, and everyone having their processes and partners needing to comply to that, and having really the standard here and streamlining and having a minimal way of how nominations are being done. I mean, this was really a chapter where we saw just first how much interest in this there is in the community, and really how much it can bring. So I'm happy to see that we already have the mandatory business requirements finalized here. The technical teams are already working on this to make sure that the APIs that were already available for the nominations they are updated to the latest mandatory business requirements, and indeed universities can start working on this. And it's clear, of course, if some partners are not yet out of the woods when it comes to the interinstitutional agreements or learning agreements, and they need to get across the finish line there, then okay, the focus is there. But there's so many that they would have the headspace for this, and really the merit of having the nominations in digital form is just so clear. So it's really good on my side to see that progress can take place here, and really the universities will be able to benefit from this. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Daiga. Valère?
Okay, as I said before, EWP is a decentralized digital infrastructure. So, and at the time it was a rather novel idea, but time and technical developments have proved us right. This also applies not only, in fact, it applies to the software, but it also applies to the data. And it's important. This has been an issue in some cases that where providers, for example, take over the data from universities, whether a university should allow that or not. In some instances, people are even suggesting that the EU should keep all these data together in one overall database. And this is something that I would think is not a good idea. And that I would be against. So my wish is in a kind of a negative wish. Let's continue to be decentralized, not only in terms of data, but also in terms of software. And if I can go a little bit beyond dreams and so on, I think also it's important to rethink the whole process of mobility. Now that we have EWP, basically what we've done is we've used an existing system and digitized it, as Joao usually says, but we haven't digitalized, which is a different word, the whole process completely. We should start thinking about novel out-of-the-box possibilities that are now becoming possible because of the development of technology. And this might lead to a much simpler, much more effective, but completely different system of dealing with mobility.
Thank you, Valère. And your wish?
I'm struggling because I had two wishes, and I know that we have limited time and we're a little bit behind schedule. There is one small wish that I'll sneak in, if you allow me, Joachim, which is it's something that we at UF do not work directly on, but some of our universities do. And I think there is still the expectation that the ESCI, the European Student Card Initiative, could be leveraged to accelerate the transition to digital cards. And here it's just a shout out because we have colleagues in Porto and Humboldt, various universities that have done great work in this field. They've even made technical solutions available. But I think there is still different rhythm at which things happen at European level in terms of these discussion topics. I think probably we can change this relatively quickly, but it's still in the back of our minds because it's also an opportunity cost. But my main wish is actually a little bit different. I think that one of the limitations that we've put upon us is geographical in nature. And universities are not necessarily the kind of institutions that care so deeply about political borders. And so I think that it's becoming increasingly obvious that when we look at countries like the Switzerland, like the Western Balkans, like the UK, even Ukraine, let's face it, we need to strengthen the interconnectedness of our systems. I sometimes ask myself, this is a personal opinion, of course, if we're shooting our own feet by not having those institutions in the EWP network, because we know that some of them are important destinations for the 20% of Action 131, I think, mobilities that can be sent outside of program countries. Some of them are in alliances. So again, we're fragmenting things there a little bit. And I have a recollection of talking with a very dear colleague of ours in Croatia not very long ago, who was explaining me that in order to organize a staff exchange with a university across the border, literally a bus drive away, you know, the paperwork needs to start 1 year before, and even then you never know if you're going to get it. So obviously some of these things are structural, they're difficult to change, but maybe we could make some progress in this regard, which links to the fact that one of my favorite recommendations in the paper, and favorite because I think it should be one of the simplest, but also one of the most impactful, would be to align the templates used for intra-European mobility and Key Action 107. It's not complicated, they're already like Siamese twins. And that would be a nice stepping stone to what is still kind of a pipe dream, but I think most colleagues would agree that someday it would be nice if they could manage all of their mobilities in a streamlined fashion and not just Erasmus mobilities, even if that's a wonderful place to start.
Thank you. So I guess we have an extensive wish list now that has been formulated by Daiga Valère-Juan. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed listening in and listening to Valère-Juan and Daiga on their contributions to the white paper and their feelings and their ideas in this regard. We will be in touch. There will be other events, webinars in the future in the context of the EUF network activities, but also in the context of the activities happening in the Erasmus Without Paper and ESCI. So thank you and be in touch.